So we've been talking about the letters to the churches. We've been talking a little bit about what those letters were about out of the book of Revelation. But we're going to take a little break. We're going to come back to it probably next week. So we have something else to talk about today. And we're going to do this really kind of before our time of prayer. I want to tell you a story today. So the story is about two brothers. Okay? Two brothers. You have the older brother, his name is Matt. The younger brother, his name is Joe. So Matt and Joe. Matt and Joe are both, Matt's probably about 31, 30. Joe is like 26. Okay? So Matt's the older, but they're both grown up, out of the house, but they share an apartment together in the same city. Neither of them is married. So they decided, let's share an apartment together, and they've been doing it for years, and it works out very well for them. Let me tell you about the two brothers. Okay, let's talk about Joe first, the younger brother. So Joe, he's an outgoing kind of guy. Right? He's always happier in the company of other people. That's kind of where he gets his energy from.
Joe's the younger one.
Yes, Joe is the younger one. So Joe, when kind of adversity comes, he lets things roll off of him. All right, he's just like, you know what? I mean, we'll find a way through it. We can move on. He's a hard charger, which means when there's something he wants to do, Joe puts together his plan and he goes and does it. He doesn't wait. He sort of throws caution to the wind, and he's like, this makes sense. Let's do it. And he does it. And Joe, the younger brother, loves challenges. Joe's all about a great challenge. This isn't a problem. This isn't a catastrophe. This is a challenge. And so whether it's life issues or whether it's I want to run a 5K or a marathon or I want to do something I've never done before, this is what Joe lives for. But then his older brother, Matt. Matt's got a little bit more life experience, and so he's kind of understands that he has life experience. And he's been around the block a few times, so he's got 5 or 6 years on Joe. And I guess you would say he's lived a lot. He's had a lot of experiences that maybe Joe hasn't had. He's had a few relationships. Some of them haven't worked out well, some of them have worked well, but he's kind of gained some wisdom in life. Right? So there's no doubt he is the wiser of the two brothers. However, Matt is the kind of guy that needs his space. Matt lives his life, and he has some friends. He has a few close friends, but not a lot of wide open friends. He's not somebody that lots of people know. Not even a lot of people know about him, but they don't really know him. He's got 1 or 2 friends. So if we were to classify the two, Joe would be an extrovert, and Matt is an introvert. Okay. But the thing about Matt, having lived and having his experiences, Matt is more sensitive of the two. Matt is a lot more in touch with his feelings than necessarily Joe is. So Joe, it's probably like, everybody's fine, it doesn't really matter, keep going. Matt can get his feelings hurt pretty easily. Whereas Joe really loves being a hard charger and going for things, Matt's more of a thinker. Okay, he thinks things through. He's not really one to get up and go. Matt wants to think. Spends a lot of time in the company and presence of his own mind. Versus discussing things with others, Matt likes to think things through. And whereas Joe loves challenges, Matt's very cautious. Think about the way they dress. Joe is all about hip clothes. Joe is wearing his skinny pants and the new shorts. Matt loves just a regular pair of Levi's and likes cargo shorts. Okay? He's not trendy. Joe's got the trendy haircut. Matt's hair is just very average, very conservative looking hair. Joe uses all the hipster slang, whatevs, it's obs. Matt thinks it's ridiculous. He doesn't talk that way. Joe is trendy, Matt is not. Neither of these are false, this is just who they are, you understand? So as we said, they share an apartment together. They both have jobs, they both have their own thing. Joe works in in the public sector. Joe's always interacting with people. Matt works for a technology firm, and he spends a lot of time with one-on-one conversations, but not a lot of people that he doesn't know. All right, he works in an office. He's part of a team, and he's got a supervisor that's in charge of the team, and then there are sort of other teams in the technology office, and they all fall under a manager. Whereas Joe is like on his way up to becoming a manager in like Kohl's or Best Buy or something. He's always interacting with other people, and he likes his job. So over time, the two of them have been talking about, they've got in their apartment building, they have some neighbors, and they really like their neighbors. They really interact well with their neighbors. Things that get along well. They've also got some mutual friends. Now, understand, Joe understands where Matt's coming from. They understand one another. And so Joe would never think about bringing people off the street because that would make Matt uncomfortable. So Joe realizes that, but they've got this group of friends and neighbors that they're both friends with, and so they've been talking about, hey, maybe we should do like a little party for all of our friends. We should have everybody over on like a Friday night. And so they've been talking about it for about a month, but nothing's ever been really decided. So Friday comes around of a particular week, and Joe decides, we're going to do this today. Must be spontaneous. Must be a hard charger. So Joe actually had the day off from work. So what he did, he got up. Matt goes to work early. Joe got up. He cleaned the apartment. He's trying to be considerate. So he doesn't want Matt's going to be at work all day. I'm home. I will get it straightened up. So he works. He calls the people that he knows. He says, hey, why don't you guys come down tonight? Let's hang out. Let's do something together. They all agree. And so they're all coming over that night we're not talking about a, disco ball party with lights flashing and music thumping. It's just a group of people getting together. There'll be some music playing, maybe a couple of drinks had, but nothing wild and crazy. Because remember, Joe is like 26, Matt's in his 30s, and some of their neighbors are even older than that. Some of them are in their 20s. So you're talking about 20s to 40s. So we're not talking about hard-charging young 20s and late teens. We're a little bit more of a mature crowd here. So Joe does all these things, gets everybody invited over. Matt doesn't know, so he thought, well, it would be cool. Matt's going to come over and see all of our friends. We'll have a great time. So this is how the day goes for Joe. But let's talk about Matt's day. So Matt goes to work. They've been working on this project. They've been preparing a bid to write software for a company that needs it. And Matt's part of a team of very talented coders. They write code very well, and they are getting ready to bid on a project for a very large corporation to handle all of their productivity. So it's going to include email, it's going to include conferencing, all these things. It's going to be a massive project. It's a massive contract. And there's a lot of pressure in the office to get this done. So there's all this work going in. Matt goes in. They start work. At 9 o'clock, there's a meeting with the company that they are making this pitch to. They make their pitch. The company says, thank you. The reps say, thank you. We've decided to go with another company. The contract falls through. Now, he was in line for a little bonus if they get this contract, but it's also going to be steady work for a while. A lot was riding on this contract. So it doesn't happen. So, as the team is trying to process how they have put all this time and energy into this bid and making a sort of what we would call a beta project, it's not really ready, but something to present as this is what will work for your company. They're all trying to process of all the work they've done, and now it feels like it's just gone. Matt gets an email, and it's from the manager over all the different teams. He says, you need to come in and chat. So he goes. Matt has the blame on the loss squarely pointed at himself. He doesn't understand this, but he gets chewed out. You lost this contract for us. You need to do better at your job. You need to work a bit harder. And you have got to help your colleagues tighten up. Matt is just stunned. He worked just as hard as everyone else and can't figure out why. Well, by lunchtime, several of the coworkers, they all go out to lunch, and come to find out, the supervisor of the team had shifted the blame to Matt. And so now Matt has been blamed for something that it was not his responsibility, but a supervisor passed the blame off because he didn't want to get yelled at. So now Matt has endured that. So now they've got to go back to the drawing board and start working and start preparing bids for other companies. Because they had several other companies that were interested in using their services, but they sort of put that on line because they really wanted this contract. So now they've got to go back and re-examine what a lot of other companies are wanting and prepare bids. So what ends up happening is, instead of getting off at 5 o'clock on a Friday, Matt ends up working until 7:30, almost 8 o'clock. And a very stressful day, a very bad day. And we've all had bad days before. And so Matt is having a colossally bad day. He's been threatened with being fired. He's been blamed by a supervisor who decided to shift the blame to him. And now he's had to work late on a Friday. So he's tired, he's frustrated, and he's a bit angry. And he's on his way back to the apartment. He gets there, and Matt opens the door, and it's full of people. It's full. All neighbors and friends, his brother, they're all having a good time smiling, enjoying one another's company. Matt has had the worst day of his life. He's not happy. He's not enjoying anyone's company. Would really much rather have a couple of beers or a couple of drinks and be alone for a while. Because what Matt really wants to do is come home and decompress and really let the weight of the day get off of his shoulders. So instead, Matt's got a household full of people. So as you can imagine, Matt's first reaction to this is shock. This is not what he was expecting. Why? Because nothing was planned. Joe has planned this whole day out for friends, and everybody including Matt are going to enjoy this. In Joe's mind, we're going to have a great time. It's a great way to start the weekend. Matt comes home, he's shocked first. But then his second reaction is anger. This is not what I wanted. This is not what I needed tonight. And he is beside himself. After going through this bad day, it's the last thing he wants to see is all these people. He just wants to decompress. He just wants to be quiet. He needs to have some time alone after this really bad day. So Joe comes up to him with a smile, hands him a drink, and says, "Hey, everybody's here, ready to start the weekend." And Matt just stares at him in silence. Frustration, anger, disappointment, all running through the expressions of his face. And Joe sees the expressions and he's confused. Wait a minute, we talked about this. Now they're not having this conversation, but in Joe's mind, we talked about doing this. It's a weekend. Why wouldn't we do this? This would be great. He's confused by what's going on. He has no idea what happened in Matt's day today. Not a clue. But he's really confused. And these people, Joe thinks, these are all of our friends and neighbors. These aren't strangers. I didn't pull somebody in off the street. Joe's kind of taking this a little bit. It's like, wait a minute. Why is he looking this way? Because you know how we can be. We can share our emotions and our feelings with a look on our face. We can share what we think in a group of people with a stare. How upset we are. Joe sees all these things and he cannot understand it. So what does Matt do? Well, obviously Matt's not going to cause a scene. So Matt decides, tamp down your anger, curb your disappointment the best you can. So he takes his drink and he walks around and tries to be social. Because these are friends, they are neighbors. And even though he is not in the mood for this, he walks around, he shakes some hands, he shares a few fake laughs because it's just not in him. But inside, Matt is stewing. And as every moment goes by, that anger begins to really boil. Because how can Joe plan a party like this after the day I've had? How can I even be here for this? So he's trying, but the anger is building. So finally, after about an hour, Matt finds a roundabout way through the apartment to the back door, and he leaves. And just down the corner from the apartment is a little pub. And Matt goes and sits, and the pub on this Friday night, for whatever reason, is empty. And he sits at the bar, and he has a beer, or a drink, or whatever he has. And he's just trying to have some quiet and some peace. But inside, he is really starting to rage. But what does he do? He sits down. Remember we talked about what kind of a person is Matt? Matt's a thinker. So Matt begins to think about what has happened, about the day that has taken place, about what has just occurred. And he thinks. And he thinks about the wrongness of the day, how he was blamed. And he thinks about how he was ambushed, as he's calling it in his mind now, by what happened at the apartment when he didn't need this. So now he's upset with his supervisor. He's upset with his manager for chewing him out. He's upset at himself and everybody else because the contract fell through. And now he is really upset with Joe because of what Joe has planned and done without even sharing with him. Joe needs to know just how badly he screwed up today. Joe needs to understand that this is not the kind of thing that I needed today. I mean, it's one thing for Joe to kind of look and see the reaction on his face, but no. Joe's going to need to understand the depth of his screw up. Joe needs to understand just how angry Matt is. And he's beginning to think and think and think. He's beginning to put together a case against Joe. Of all the things he's done wrong, he's putting together this case. And so what essentially is happening is he is imagining the coming argument. Joe has really, really hurt me, he thinks. And so as he's thinking these things through, Matt is beginning to think about the argument, the discussion that's going to have. And he thinks about all the responses that Joe will make, all the arguments that Joe will say. And Matt is planning out his responses to Joe's explanations. Matt is beginning to examine all the possibilities of this discussion and has a response for every little thing that Joe might say. He plans to hammer Joe. Because what you see, what's happening right now, is Matt is putting together an arsenal.
What is that?
He's putting together a collection of weapons. But we're not talking about actual guns. We're talking about words. And Matt is planning this out. He is planning to load this weapon of his. And this weapon is his mind. And this weapon is his intent. And this weapon is going to be his mouth. And the ammunition that he's going to use are these arguments, are these points of view. And all these things that he is planning out. Matt is preparing his ammunition. He is preparing for this battle. And as he thinks more, he continues to build this case against Joe in his mind. And understand, the things that Matt is considering are things that have happened. Little things. Because now it's not just a matter of what happened Friday night. Now it's little things that have been bothering him all throughout. And he's bringing it all together into this grand argument, this grand weapon that he is going to unleash on Joe. He's loading this weapon, gathering his arsenal of words that will do maximum damage. Maximum damage. And he needs to make Joe understand how badly he messed up. He wants Joe. He needs Joe to feel bad. He needs Joe to see what a terrible and self-centered person he is. He needs Joe to realize that he has only thought about himself. He needs Joe to look in the mirror and say, I'm a bad person. He's played this whole argument out in his mind, and he's ready to go home. He is going to lay waste to Joe for all the things that Joe has done. So it's an interesting story about two brothers, Matt and Joe. How we build cases of arguments. So I want you to turn in your Bible to the book of James. James is toward the end. James chapter 3. And listen to what it says. Starting with verse 3. And I'm in the Message version. It says, a bit in the mouth of a horse controls the whole horse. A small rudder on a huge ship in the hands of a skilled captain sets a course in the face of the strongest winds. A word out of your mouth may seem of no account, but it can accomplish nearly anything or destroy it. It only takes a spark, remember, to set off a forest fire. A careless or wrongly placed word out of your mouth can do just that. By our speech, we can ruin the world, turn harmony to chaos, throw mud on a reputation, send the whole world up in smoke, and go up in smoke with it. Smoke right from the pit of hell. This is scary. You can tame a tiger, but you can't tame the tongue. It's never been done. The tongue runs wild. It's a wanton killer. With our tongues, we bless God our Father. With the same tongues, we curse the very men and women He made in His image. Curses and blessings out of the same mouth. My friends, this can't go on. A spring doesn't gush fresh water one day and salty water the next, does it? An apple trees don't bear strawberries, do they? Raspberry bushes don't bear apples, do they? You're not going to dip into a polluted mud hole and get a cup of clear, cool water, are you? So it's interesting to hear what this is saying in reference to our story about Joe and Matt. And you've heard these scriptures before. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. But he's talking about the tongue and how the tongue can say things that can either build a person up or ruin a person. And while he's mentioning the tongue here, what James is really pointing out is the heart. James is pointing out what's going on inside of us that leads to these words that come out. So listen to what he says. You can tame a tiger, but you can't tame a tongue. It's not saying that your words you don't have any control over. What he's saying is, once those words go out, you can't do anything about them. Those words that you speak can bring life, and they can bring damage and woundings and injury. The tongue, the words that we speak, all of these things, all they are is like a speaker on a stereo. All your mouth is doing is giving sound to what's inside. So I want to turn to another verse. First book of the New Testament, Matthew. Matthew chapter 15. 17. 15, 17. So Jesus has just had a chat with the Pharisees, and Peter says, I don't get it. Can you put this in plain language? Jesus says, you too? Are you being willfully stupid? Don't you know that anything that is swallowed works its way through the intestines and is finally goes into the sewer? But what comes out of the mouth gets its start where? From the heart. It's from the heart that we vomit up evil arguments, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, lies, and cussing. That's what pollutes. Eating or not eating certain foods, washing your hands, that's neither here nor there. So the words that we use when we speak, when we make our arguments, when we do these things, These words are originating from down inside of our heart. So what am I saying? Am I saying that your heart is bad? No. That's not the point here. The point is not to say that a bad heart is resulting in if you've said something, then your heart is just all nasty and wrong and you need to ask God to forgive you. That's not what's saying here. It's just saying the words are coming from what's there. And if what's in your heart is hurt, is broken, maybe you're a follower of Jesus, that's great. But if what's there is hurt and is broken and is injured, then what are you going to produce from that? Hurtful, injuring, damaging words. This is what's coming back out. This is what Jesus is saying, and this is where James was going with this. Look, you got to understand that the tongue, when it speaks, and Jesus is saying it's coming from the heart, when there is hurt and damage there, what's coming out is going to be intended to hurt and damage those who are around us. And this is tough. These are tough things to take. We react out of anger. And as followers of Jesus, we're saying, hey, we're not going to be violent. I was hurt, so I'm not going to go over there and club them with a bat. I'm going to rise above violence. But we stop and forget that we can be extremely violent with our words. And our words can do damage like there is no tomorrow. If you cut your finger like Grayson did several months ago, and you slice it open and it's a bad slice, you can take that, you can go to the hospital, they can sew it up, they can fix it, and it'll heal. You break your leg, you go to the hospital, they'll fix it, they'll put it in a cast, maybe they'll put a rod in there, straighten it out, it'll heal. But the damage caused by words, the wounds that are caused by words, there's no hospital to fix those. There's no clinic that will help with that. Not only that, but if you wound your hand, give it a little bit of time, what's going to happen? It'll heal. A couple of weeks, you're good to go. But wounds that you have given or received from words, those wounds last a very, very long time. They don't heal quickly. And now, once that's happened, now somebody else has a wounded heart, and the cycle continues. Hurtful words and hurtful words. So what does this all mean? Now go to the book of Acts. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts. Jesus is gone. Now the church is beginning. Acts chapter 15. And we're going to start with verse 30. Acts 15:30. Now this is two of the earliest hard workers of the church. The Apostle Paul and what would have been the Apostle Barnabas. What would have been. And so off they went to Antioch. On arrival, they gathered the church and read the letter. This is a letter from Jerusalem. The people were greatly relieved and pleased. Judas and Silas, now again, this is a different Judas, common name back then. Good preachers, both of them, strengthened their new friends with many words of courage and hope. Then it was time to go home. They were sent off by their new friends with laughter and embraces all around to report back to those who had sent them. Paul and Barnabas stayed on in Antioch, teaching and preaching the word of God. They weren't alone. There were a number of teachers and preachers at that time in Antioch. So this is a really good place to be. After a few days of this, Paul said to Barnabas, let's go back and visit all of our friends in each of the towns where we preach the word of God. Let's see how they're doing. It's a great idea. Barnabas wanted to take John along, the John nicknamed Mark. That name will become very familiar, as in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But Paul wouldn't have him. He wasn't about to take along a quitter who, as soon as the going got tough, he jumped ship. So earlier in the book of Acts, we have Paul and Barnabas going out, and there was some persecution, and Mark left and went home. Paul hasn't forgotten this. In other words, Paul was what? Wounded. In a time of great trouble and persecution, Mark abandoned them. He wasn't about to take along a quitter who, as soon as the going got tough, had jumped ship on them in Pamphylia. Tempers flared, and they ended up going their separate ways. Barnabas took Mark and sailed for Cyprus. Paul chose Silas, and offered up by their friends to the grace of the Master, went to Syria and Cilicia to build up muscle and sinew in those congregations. And so the rest of Acts is about Paul and Silas. There is no more mentions in this book of Barnabas. He's gone. There are some stories, we don't know if they're true or not, about Barnabas and his actions following that. But the rest of the Bible, there is no more mention of Barnabas. And what might possibly have been the Apostle Barnabas is now gone. Words between the two of them. Both of them feeling very strongly about their point of view. Mark, having left, hurts Paul deeply, abandons Paul. Barnabas loves John Mark, wants him to come back. Paul says no. Barnabas says yes. The anger goes, tempers flare, words come out. No reconciliation ever takes place that we know of between Paul and Barnabas. Now we know from 2 Timothy that reconciliation takes place between Paul and Mark. But there's no record of it ever happening with Barnabas. The damage was done. The words were spoken. The injuries were created. And the wounds never healed. See, what we're learning here is this. When we speak, when we're hurt, when we have wounds, we have to stop taking out our weapons and loading it up with bullets of our words. We have to stop doing this. We need to put down our guns, unload our weapons, and refuse to fire shots. And the question about this, especially when you are deeply wounded, is how do you stop? How do you not fire at somebody else? How do you not unload your weapon and shoot somebody in the face with every, what seems to you, right and true argument you have? Well, there's really only one way. You have to forgive. You have to forgive. Truly, deeply, and without reservation, you must forgive. One last verse. The book of Colossians. Acts, Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. Chapter 3 and verse 12. And it's interesting that Paul is writing this. Paul is going to write these words, but this is most likely after what has happened with Barnabas. Listen to what he says. So, chosen by God for this new life of love, dress in the wardrobe God picked out for you. Compassion, kindness, humility, quiet strength, discipline. Be even-tempered, content with second place, quick to forgive an offense. Forgive as quickly and as completely as the Master forgave you. And regardless of whatever else you put on, Wear love. It's your basic, all-purpose garment. Never be without it. Let the peace of Christ keep you in tune with each other, in step with each other. It's the only way to keep yourself from allowing the hurt inside of you from bubbling out and boiling out and firing at others and hurting them is to forgive. Because what we think of when we say these words, when we come out and when we attack and when we pick up our weapon and we fire away, it's a form of revenge. I'm going to get even. I need to get even with you. You need to hurt just like I hurt. And the only way to avoid doing that is both to forgive and ask to be forgiven. Ask to be forgiven. This is what the gospel is about. So, been your pastor for a little bit of time, not a ton, but a little bit. Where I failed you, please forgive me. Devin, the many times I have failed and fired words at you, unending words, hurtful words, destructive words, please forgive me. And this is the only way that we can stop the cycle, stop the avalanche of hurt that wells inside of us and hurts others, is to forgive. Stop, let it go, and forgive. And as we forgive one another, those wounds in our heart that wish to come out and speak and wound others, well, those wounds heal. And now, instead of words like what Matt prepared to say to Joe, you're selfish, you're self-centered, you shouldn't have done this, you didn't ask me, you don't realize. Instead, with forgiveness in his heart, he says, I had a really bad day today. I appreciate what you did. I'm sorry that I didn't honor the party. It was a really bad day. I failed. I'm sorry. And now Joe, as he looks and he listens to this, and he's getting ready to go off on Matt for ruining the party, Joe says, dude, I had no idea. I should have let you know. I thought it would have been fun. I wish I'd understood about your party. I'm sorry too. So what do you have? There's no breach between the brothers. There's only forgiveness. There's healing that takes place. And then there's one of the sacraments of the Catholic Church. Reconciliation takes place. So how do we stop the onslaught of all that stuff? We forgive. We reconcile. And we heal. This is what we do. And so, this is why we come now to the table of the Lord. Because why do we forgive one another? Why are we reconciled with one another? Because as Paul said there in Colossians, forgive as quickly as Christ has forgiven you. Be reconciled with one another quickly because God reconciled you to himself so quickly. And so this is what this was all about when Jesus took the bread. And the night he was betrayed, he took the bread and he broke it. And he says, take and eat the body, which is broken for you. So he handed the bread. And the thing to remember is this was done in an atmosphere of community among friends. And then he took the cup and he poured the wine. Take this and drink this. This represents my blood, which is poured out for you. It represents the new covenant, which is all about forgiveness. All the wrong things, all the ways in which we have become estranged and separated from God, he said, this is how this changes. And so Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11, as often as you do this, you eat this bread and you drink this cup, you remember the sacrifice of the Lord to the day he comes. And so as we've done that, we now declare the mystery. Christ has died. Christ is risen. Christ will come again. Let's pray.